The morning sun filtered through the half-closed blinds, casting golden streaks across the living room of the Sullivan house. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine from the surrounding trees, and the distant hum of traffic barely intruded on the suburban quiet. The house itself, a two-story colonial with white siding and black shutters, looked every bit the picture of serenity. Inside, Margaret Maggie Sullivan sat in her favorite armchair by the bay window, a cup of steaming coffee warming her hands. Her chestnut hair was streaked with silver, pulled loosely back from her face that had grown soft with age, but was still marked by sharp, thoughtful eyes that missed little. Her olive-toned skin bore the gentle creases of a woman who had laughed often, worried deeply, and loved fiercely. Across from her, Thomas Sullivan, her husband of 34 years, shuffled papers on the oak coffee table. Thomas, tall and broad-shouldered with thinning gray hair and a beard speckled with white, carried a quiet, steady presence, one that comforted Maggie, yet sometimes weighed on her with unspoken regrets. His green eyes, often calm and reassuring, now flicked toward Maggie with a fleeting shadow of concern. Their home echoed the sounds of suburban peace, the distant barking of Max, their 80-year-old golden retriever, whose wiry coat shone under the sunlight, the jingle of his collar marking his slow, deliberate movements as he padded along the hardwood floors. Max had a gentle temperament, loyal to a fault, and seemed to sense the undercurrents of tension that Maggie herself had begun to feel. Ethan Sullivan, their youngest son, entered the room quietly, closing the door with a soft click. Ethan, 35, lean with the sharp angles of a man used to athletic pursuits, had the dark brown hair and eyes of his father, but carried a certain polished charm that had made him successful in the finance industry. His skin was fair, almost alabaster, and his smile could disarm even the most cautious. Yet Maggie sometimes caught a glint of something calculating in that gaze, reminiscent of shadows she had never seen in Andrew, her firstborn. "Mom, Dad," Ethan began, his voice smooth and confident. "I was thinking it might be time to update the will. You know, make sure everything's secure in case something happens." He glanced at Maggie with an almost imperceptible smirk. "It's really about protecting the family assets, making sure nothing falls through the cracks." Maggie's heart skipped. A chill traced her spine, not from the cool morning air, but from the unease in Ethan's tone. She looked at him, searching his face, and saw a flash that stopped her cold, a look that mirrored Thomas's expression from Andrew's funeral 25 years ago. The memory struck her with a pain she hadn't thought would surface again. The grief, the confusion, the gnawing suspicion that something had always been wrong. Andrew had been 25 then, bright and impulsive, his dark hair tousled by the wind, his eyes wide with the thrill of hiking a new trail. Maggie had watched him teeter on the edge of the gorge, laughing, confident, only to see him disappear over the rocks in an instant. The echo of that scream had never left her. Thomas cleared his throat, breaking her reverie. "It's just, Ethan might have a point," he said slowly. His voice carried the same calmness he always did, but Maggie caught the subtle tension in his jaw, the almost imperceptible tightening around his green eyes. "We've been meaning to do it for a while." Ethan moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on his father's shoulder, his polished watch glinting in the sunlight. "We just want to help," he said. His tone was earnest, yet Maggie noted the faint curl of his lips that seemed almost strategic. "You've worked your whole lives to build this. Don't let anyone mess it up." Maggie's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, her knuckles whitening. She took a slow sip, forcing her pulse to steady. There was the charm of a dutiful son in Ethan's words, But underneath, something predatory lingered. Her mind raced through the years, the missing amounts from accounts she and Thomas had carefully guarded, the unexplained trips Ethan had taken, the subtle manipulations of Lily, her daughter-in-law. Lily, 32, petite with honey blonde hair cut into a sharp bob and soft blue eyes, always presented herself as sweet, concerned, a model daughter-in-law. Her smile was radiant, but Maggie had begun to notice the way Lily's eyes narrowed when discussing money, the way she lingered over the slightest financial detail as if calculating its potential benefit. "Mom?" Ethan asked again, sensing her hesitation. "We just want to make sure everything is okay." Maggie nodded slowly, forcing a smile that felt fragile and unnatural. "Of course, Ethan. I understand." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying the storm of emotions inside her. Trust, love, doubt, fear, all tangled in a knot that seemed impossible to untangle. Thomas reached for her hand across the table, rough and reassuring. "It's just paperwork, Maggie, nothing more." Yet Maggie's mind was elsewhere. The memory of Andrew's death, the feeling of helplessness that had haunted her for decades, stirred a visceral fear she could not shake. She recalled the quiet conversations in hushed tones, the secrets she'd glimpsed but never fully understood, the gnawing suspicion that Ethan had inherited more than just his father's charm. Outside, the wind rattled the trees, brushing against the house with an almost sinister whisper. Max padded to Maggie's feet and sat, tilting his head as if sensing her turmoil. Maggie bent to stroke his golden fur, drawing a small comfort from his loyal presence. Ethan lingered a moment longer, watching her intently, before glancing toward Lily, who had remained near the kitchen doorway. Lily's soft voice followed, sweet and melodious. "We're just trying to protect the family, Maggie. That's all we want." She moved gracefully, her posture perfect, but Maggie caught the subtle tension in her shoulders, the careful way her hands never rested still, the constant calculation in her gaze. Maggie exhaled slowly, trying to quell the rising tide of suspicion and fear. She had always believed in the goodness of her family, but the shadows were growing longer, and she felt them closing in with every polite word and well-meant smile. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and crimson, Maggie sat on the porch swing with Thomas beside her. She could hear Ethan and Lily laughing in the living room, a performance so convincing it made her stomach churn. Yet she could not shake the cold realization. The perfect family she had known was only a facade. Beneath the smiles and polite conversation, there was something dark, something patient, something calculated. And for the first time in decades, Maggie knew that the ghosts of the past were not entirely at rest. She tightened her shawl around her shoulders and whispered to Thomas, barely audible over the evening breeze. "We need to be careful, Thomas. Something isn't right. I can feel it." Thomas nodded slowly, his jaw tight, his eyes reflecting the same concern that had haunted Maggie since Andrew's death. "I know," he said quietly. "I've felt it too." As night settled over the Sullivan household, a quiet tension wrapped around the walls like a heavy fog. The perfect family, Maggie realized, was merely an illusion, one that might shatter with the first whisper of truth. A cold drizzle fell on the Sullivan house that morning, mist curling around the treetops like whispering ghosts. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Maggie sat at the long oak dining table, papers spread before her, her coffee untouched and growing lukewarm. Her chestnut hair, now streaked further with silver, hung loosely around her face. Her hazel eyes, sharp and discerning, scanned the documents with a mounting sense of dread. The sunlight filtered weakly through gray clouds, casting a pall over the room, reflecting the storm brewing in Maggie's heart. Thomas Sullivan entered the room, tall and broad-shouldered as ever, his beard more flecked with white than the day before. His green eyes, usually steady, now darted toward Maggie with a fleeting anxiety. He had always been the rock in the household, the man who soothed worries with his calm presence, but the papers on the table betrayed a storm he had been hiding. "Maggie, he started, his voice tight, unwilling. Maggie didn't look up. "Thomas, tell me now. Why are these documents different? These signatures? They aren't mine." Thomas ran a hand through his thinning gray hair, exhaling slowly. I didn't want to worry you," he said quietly, his voice trembling ever so slightly. "It's Ethan. He's been withdrawing from our retirement accounts, secretly." His green eyes, usually so composed, shone with shame. "I didn't know how to stop him." Maggie's pulse quickened. Her fingers shook slightly as she traced the forged signature on the paper, each loop and stroke meticulously crafted. Ethan had learned how to imitate her handwriting perfectly, a skill that required observation and practice, and he had executed it with a precision that chilled Maggie to her core. The reality sank in slowly, a weight pressing against her chest. Her own son, the child she had nurtured and trusted, had betrayed her. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. How could he? How could he even think? Her voice broke, and she turned to Thomas, searching for solace in his eyes. He reached for her hand, roughened by years of work, and squeezed gently. "We have to be careful, Maggie. He knows how much we trust him. He won't stop unless we find a way to confront him without giving him the upper hand." From the kitchen doorway, Lily Sullivan appeared, her petite frame almost delicate, with honey blonde hair in a neat bob and soft blue eyes that always seemed filled with concern. But today, Maggie noticed a subtle tension in Lily's posture, the way she clutched a cup of tea with hands that refused to be still. "Mom, Thomas, don't overreact," Lily said, her voice silky, almost soothing. "It's probably just a misunderstanding. Ethan didn't mean any harm." Maggie's eyes narrowed. She had learned long ago to read between the lines of Lily's words. The sweetness was a mask, a carefully constructed performance. She had caught Lily whispering to Ethan in the living room earlier, her words barely audible. "If they discover it, we'll lose everything. We have to act fast." Maggie remembered it clearly, the cold calculation hidden behind that soft voice. Thomas stiffened at the memory, his jaw tightening. "I heard that too," he said quietly, voice low. "I thought I imagined it." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Maggie's heart thudded painfully. The illusion of family safety, the image of trust and warmth, was crumbling before her eyes. Her own son and daughter-in-law were weaving a web of deceit right under her nose. She sank back into her chair, her mind racing. Every conversation she had overheard, every unexpected withdrawal from the accounts, every casual remark Ethan had made about family investments, now appeared in a new, sinister light. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than anything she had ever felt. She thought of Andrew, her eldest, who had died in that tragic accident decades ago, and the unbearable suspicion that had haunted her ever since. Could she have prevented this? Had she been more vigilant? The thought gnawed at her relentlessly. Thomas came to her side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this," he said softly, but Maggie could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. His hands, which had always been steady, trembled faintly as he reached for the papers. "We need to document everything. Keep a record. This can't go unaddressed." Maggie nodded, though a shiver ran through her spine. She pulled the papers toward her and began organizing them meticulously, noting dates, amounts, and the subtle variations in the handwriting. Her mind worked quickly, cataloging evidence, while her heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. She realized that confronting Ethan or Lily without solid proof would be disastrous. They were careful, calculated, and persuasive. Any misstep could give them the advantage, and Maggie could not afford that. Later that afternoon, the sky darkened further, and a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. Max, the golden retriever, trotted into the dining room, his tail wagging slowly. His dark amber eyes, intelligent and sensitive, fixed on Maggie as if he understood the tension. Maggie bent to scratch behind his ears, drawing a brief comfort from his presence. Max had always been a quiet observer of the family dynamics, a loyal companion who sensed the emotional undercurrents before anyone else. As the rain intensified outside, Thomas suggested calling a financial advisor. Maggie agreed, knowing they needed an expert to examine the accounts for irregularities. They called Robert Hayes, a family friend in his late 40s with short salt and pepper hair, a sturdy build, and a reputation for meticulous financial oversight. His hazel eyes were sharp, his demeanor professional, yet approachable. Within an hour, Robert arrived, briefcase in hand, and began sifting through the records with a practiced eye. "It's quite clear," Robert said quietly after several minutes of examining the documents. "These withdrawals are not authorized, and the signatures are forged. Whoever did this knows your habits, your handwriting, and has planned this over time." He looked at Maggie and Thomas gravely. "You're lucky you noticed before it got out of hand." Maggie's stomach twisted. "We have to confront them," she said, voice low but firm. "We have to stop this before it escalates further." Thomas shook his head slightly. "Not yet. We need more evidence, more control. We can't let them know we're aware. They'll cover their tracks if they sense we're suspicious." The room fell into a tense silence. Rain pattered relentlessly against the windows, a reminder of the storm brewing outside, and the storm within the Sullivan household. Maggie could feel the web tightening around them, the perfect image of family dissolving into suspicion and fear. She realized that the threat was not just financial, but deeply personal, eroding the foundation of trust she had built over decades. As evening fell, Maggie sat back in her chair, the papers spread before her, her mind racing through possibilities, strategies, and contingencies. She glanced at Thomas, whose strong hands rested on the table, and felt the familiar mix of love, fear, and resolve. "We'll protect ourselves," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "We'll uncover everything, and we'll make sure justice is served." The day ended with a heavy quiet over the Sullivan household. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within, and Maggie knew that the calm facade of their perfect family was now irrevocably broken. What had seemed like subtle discrepancies and whispers had now become a tangible threat, one that would shape the coming days with tension, strategy, and confrontation. A thin frost covered the Colorado mountains as the Sullivan family drove up the winding road, the sky painted in cold hues of gray and pink, the morning air crisp and biting. Maggie gripped the edge of the car seat, her hazel eyes scanning the snow-speckled pines with an unease she could not shake. Her chestnut hair was tucked into a scarf, strands falling across her freckled, pale cheeks, reflecting the tension coiling in her stomach. Every mile reminded her of Andrew, her eldest son, whose death 25 years ago had left a wound that never fully healed. Thomas, sitting beside her, adjusted the rear-view mirror, his strong jaw tense beneath his graying beard. At 63, he carried the weight of grief and caution, his green eyes clouded with concern but softened by decades of composure. "Maggie, maybe this trip will help," he said gently, his voice attempting calm. "We need to heal, to be together as a family." Maggie's gaze met his, and for a moment, she saw the hope in his expression, the yearning for normalcy. Yet deep down, a voice whispered that normalcy might be the very trap they were walking into. Ethan, their youngest, drove the rental SUV with practiced ease. At 34, he was tall and lean, with dark hair combed back, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that could charm almost anyone. But Maggie had always noticed the way his gaze lingered, calculating, like a chess player predicting moves several steps ahead. Next to him, Lily, Ethan's wife, adjusted the rear-view mirror with delicate hands, her blonde hair catching the weak sunlight. Her blue eyes sparkled, yet Maggie sensed a flicker of impatience, a subtle sharpness beneath her soft, melodic voice. Maggie felt a chill creep up her spine. The journey was long, the winding roads hugging sheer cliffs that disappeared into clouds below. Every turn seemed to echo with memories of Andrew's accident, the fatal slip on the mountain path that had ended his life. Maggie swallowed hard, trying to focus on the conversation, but every laugh from Ethan and Lily sounded hollow, a reminder of the tension lurking beneath smiles. Upon arrival at the mountain cabin, a rustic 2-story wooden structure with smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney, Maggie's unease deepened. The cabin was cozy, yet its familiarity was unsettling. The same pine-scented air, the creaking floorboards, the shadowed corners where memories seemed to linger. Maggie noticed muddy footprints near the entrance, a faint brown smear leading into the living room. "Thomas," she whispered, voice trembling. He frowned, examining the floor. "Must be the staff prepping the cabin," he said, though Maggie sensed his tone lacked conviction. That night, Maggie struggled to sleep. She lay in the cabin's upper bedroom, the quilt heavy against her chest, her heart pounding. The wind rattled the window panes, and shadows stretched across the wooden walls. In her dream, Andrew appeared at the window, a faint figure with dark hair and gentle brown eyes. His voice, a whisper carried by the wind, trembled with warning. "Mother, don't let him kill you like he killed me." Maggie awoke with a gasp, her hands clutching the quilt, heart racing. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, the wooden floor cold against her bare feet. Her gaze fell on a small pile near the wardrobe, a jacket she recognized instantly. Andrew's old denim jacket, faded at the elbows and collar, hung neatly on the rack. This wasn't brought here," she muttered to herself, panic gnawing at her chest. Thomas stirred from the bed, tall figure silhouetted in the moonlight, and sat up. "Maggie, what is it?" I saw it," she whispered, pointing to the jacket. "Andrew's jacket. It's here, but no one brought it." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, sighing deeply. "Maybe someone on the staff? Perhaps a relative?" Maggie shook her head violently. "No one knows about it. Only us. Only us." Her chest tightened with fear, and she felt a cold bead of sweat slide down her temple. Downstairs, Ethan and Lily laughed softly as they unpacked, their voices carrying up the stairs. Maggie strained to hear, noting how Ethan's laugh seemed forced, overly bright. Lily moved with the same careful precision she always showed, adjusting items and glancing up with an almost imperceptible smirk. Maggie's mind spun. They had orchestrated this trip, chosen this cabin, deliberately. Why? The thought that Ethan could be planning something as insidious as Andrew's accident twisted her stomach. As Maggie tried to steady her thoughts, she noticed Max, the golden retriever, pacing nervously by the window. His amber eyes darted to the shadows outside, ears pricked, tail low. At 8 years old, Max had been her constant protector, keenly aware of dangers that humans often overlooked. He growled softly, a low warning that Maggie did not dismiss. She bent down, running a hand through his fur, feeling his tension radiate into her. Max sensed it, she realized. Something about this trip was not right. The next morning, Maggie decided to explore the cabin alone, hoping to gather her thoughts. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. As she moved through the living room, she noticed another anomaly, a small, folded note tucked under a vase. Her hands shook as she picked it up. In neat, feminine handwriting, it read, "Be careful. Not everyone here is what they seem." The paper felt cold against her fingers, and her mind raced. Was it from Lily, a warning she didn't mean to be found? Or someone else, a stranger who knew more than Maggie realized? Thomas appeared behind her, his broad shoulders blocking the doorway. "Maggie, what did you find?" His green eyes searched hers, steady but alert. Maggie hesitated, then handed him the note. His brows furrowed as he read, the weight of concern settling over his face. "We need to be cautious," he said finally. "This cabin, it's stirring up old memories and maybe new threats." That afternoon, as the sky darkened with impending snow, Maggie returned to her room to find the muddy footprints had multiplied, weaving strange patterns across the wooden floor. She felt trapped in a nightmare where the past and present converged. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, seemed to whisper Andrew's warning. Her pulse raced, mind spinning with fear and suspicion, yet a fierce determination took root. She could not allow history to repeat itself. She would uncover the truth behind Ethan and Lily's actions, no matter what it took. Night fell again, and Maggie lay in bed, listening to the wind howl around the cabin. Max curled beside her, offering silent companionship. Her thoughts turned to Andrew, to his short life, and the unanswered questions that haunted her. She clutched the quilt tightly, a mixture of grief, dread, and resolve coursing through her. The jacket remained in the wardrobe, a silent sentinel of the past. Maggie knew she was not safe, yet she also knew she would not flee. She had survived Andrew's death once, and she would confront whatever was coming now. As she drifted into a restless sleep, the shadows of the cabin seemed to grow longer, stretching toward the corners where secrets lurked. The invitation to this mountain retreat had been extended with a smile, but Maggie realized with chilling clarity that it was a trap disguised as reconciliation. Her heart ached, but her mind sharpened. The game had begun, and she would be ready. A dense fog hung over the Colorado mountain trail, swirling in the early morning light, chilling the exposed skin of anyone daring enough to hike its rugged path. Maggie tightened the scarf around her neck, pulling her dark brown hair from her face, the chill doing nothing to ease the knot of dread coiling in her chest. Her hazel eyes, wide with unease, scanned the gray horizon, where jagged cliffs disappeared into the mist, memories of Andrew's fatal fall decades ago pressing like a lead weight upon her. Thomas walked beside her, his broad shoulders stooped under the weight of worry, green eyes shadowed with fear. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, jaw clenched, feeling every creak of the wooden walking stick he carried. Ethan strode ahead, the crisp air accentuating the sharp lines of his lean face, blue eyes glittering with that same cold precision Maggie had always feared. His dark hair was slightly mussed from the hike, and his tall, athletic frame moved with ease along the rocky path, a calculated confidence in every step. Lily, just a few paces behind him, twirled a strand of her blonde hair, the faint curl brushing her smooth porcelain cheeks. Her smile was bright, almost theatrical, but Maggie noticed the tension behind it. Her soft blue eyes flickered with impatience and something darker, something unreadable. The trail grew narrower as they ascended, the air thinner and colder, carrying the faint scent of wet pine and earth. Maggie's heartbeat picked up as they approached a familiar plateau, the very cliff edge where Andrew had slipped 25 years ago. Her palms grew clammy, gripping the railing of rough wood that marked the edge, the memory of her son's scream reverberating in her mind. Thomas put a steady hand on her back, sensing her fear, but also feeling a strange unease of his own. He had noticed subtle glances exchanged between Ethan and Lily, silent signals Maggie could not yet decipher. "Isn't this incredible, Mom?" Ethan called over his shoulder, voice light, almost playful, yet it carried an edge Maggie couldn't ignore. He stepped close to the cliff, the wind catching his jacket. "Just like the place where Andrew slipped," he added casually, his tone disturbingly calm. Maggie felt her stomach twist. The hairs on the back of her neck rose. She opened her mouth to answer, to warn him, but before the words formed, Ethan lunged forward. Maggie's world tilted. Her feet left the ground as her body collided with the edge of a tree branch, scraping her arms and torso. The fall seemed to stretch forever, a blur of jagged rocks and cold air. Pain shot through her side as she landed on a rocky slope, twisting and tumbling downward. Shock and adrenaline blended into a surreal haze. She tried to call out, but her voice barely escaped her throat, a strangled whisper carried off by the wind. Above, Thomas staggered as a heavy weight struck the back of his head. The world spun violently, his vision fracturing into shards of light and shadow. He fell to the path, his head throbbing, ears ringing with the sound of Lily's piercing scream. "It's over, Ethan! There's no turning back now!" The sound sliced through the fog like a knife, sending shivers down Maggie's spine even as she lay battered below. Time seemed to slow as Maggie pressed herself against the rough rocks, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The forest around her felt alive, each branch a potential danger, each shadow a potential threat. Max, the golden retriever she had brought along, appeared moments later, bounding down the slope with surprising agility. His amber eyes, wide with concern, searched for her, and Maggie felt a surge of relief. Max nudged her side gently, whining softly, a tether to reality in a world that seemed intent on ending her life. Struggling, Maggie crawled toward a small outcropping, her body screaming in protest, bruises blossoming across her pale skin. Thoughts of Andrew pressed against her mind, his absence a hollow echo that mixed with the fear of this new betrayal. How could her own son, the boy she had nurtured and protected, now stand above her with such malice? She clenched her fists, nails digging into dirt and stone, her inner resolve flaring. She would survive this. She had to. Above her, Ethan and Lily waited, a tense silence between them. Lily's pale hands twisted in her scarf, face pale but composed, lips pressed into a thin line. Her blue eyes, once bright with feigned cheer, now mirrored cold determination. Ethan's jaw was tight, eyes scanning the slope with impatience. "Move," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself, though the command seemed directed at Maggie. The power dynamic between them was clear. He controlled this situation, and she was vulnerable. Maggie's mind raced. She remembered the dream from the previous night, Andrew's warning echoing in her ears. "Don't let him kill you like he killed me." The words were now a call to arms. She had survived one tragedy involving Andrew. She could not allow history to repeat itself. Gritting her teeth, she pushed against the rocks, inch by inch, focusing on survival rather than fear. Every movement was a battle against pain, against despair, against the betrayal that had cut so deeply. Thomas, meanwhile, had regained partial consciousness, pressing his hand to his forehead, eyes fluttering open. Blood trickled from a cut above his brow, and dizziness threatened to topple him again. Yet he instinctively assessed the terrain, his green eyes narrowing at the sight of Ethan and Lily, piecing together their plan. Rage and betrayal mingled with fear. His strong hands gripped the walking stick as he staggered toward the edge, his mind calculating the next steps. He needed to reach Maggie before Ethan could attempt a final, decisive act. From below, Maggie saw movement along the tree line. A park ranger, tall and robust, dressed in dark green, with a weathered face marked by decades of exposure to sun and wind, had noticed the commotion. Ranger Collins, 58, no nonsense and quick to act, had been on patrol when he heard Lily scream. With decisive movements, he radioed for backup and began descending the slope, his experienced legs navigating the uneven terrain with practiced skill. Maggie's heart leapt. Help was coming. Ethan's blue eyes flicked toward the descending ranger, a fleeting flash of calculation crossing his sharp features. He whispered something to Lily, who nodded, and then they backed away slightly from the cliff edge, watching as reinforcements approached. Maggie could barely comprehend their plan in that instant, but she realized the depth of their cruelty. They had intended this fall to be final, but the presence of another human had disrupted it. Max continued to circle Maggie, growling low, sensing the danger she could not yet see clearly. His fur bristled and his tail stiffened as he protected her from sudden threats. Maggie patted his head, murmuring encouragement. The loyal dog was not just a companion. He was her anchor to reality, a reminder that she had allies in this battle for survival. By the time Ranger Collins reached her, Thomas had staggered closer, his arm around a sapling for support. The ranger assessed the situation quickly, nodding. "You two need to get out of here now," he instructed firmly, eyes sharp and authoritative. Maggie, with trembling hands, nodded, the adrenaline keeping pain at bay. Thomas grunted in agreement, sweat mingling with blood and snow. The ranger secured ropes and harnesses, guiding Maggie and Thomas slowly up the slope, each movement deliberate, careful. As they reached a safer ledge, Maggie allowed herself a brief glance back at Ethan and Lily. Their faces were masks, perfectly composed on the surface, but their eyes betrayed a flicker of frustration, a recognition that their plan had failed. Maggie's chest heaved, relief and anger warring within her. She had survived a fall meant to end her life. Thomas had survived an assault meant to render him incapacitated. Their children, though seemingly innocent, had orchestrated a deception and betrayal that cut to the bone. When they reached flat ground, Ranger Collins guided them to his vehicle. Maggie clutched Max's leash, feeling the warmth of life returning to her limbs, the mountain's chill replaced by the warmth of resolve. Thomas's hand found hers, a firm squeeze grounding them both. For the first time since the day Andrew had died, Maggie felt a flicker of control, a spark of hope that they could face the truth and hold those responsible accountable. That night, as snow began to fall gently over the mountains, Maggie sat in the cabin, bandaged and exhausted, but her mind was alight with clarity. Ethan and Lily had revealed their true selves, calculating, cold, unfeeling. Their Next steps had to be cautious, deliberate. She could not allow another tragedy to unfold. The jacket she had found earlier still hung in the wardrobe, a silent reminder of the past, but now it also served as a symbol. She would uncover the truth and protect her remaining family, no matter what the cost. Max lay at her feet, tired but alert, ears twitching at every sound. Maggie stroked his fur, whispering promises of vigilance. She would survive. They would survive. And this time, the past would not dictate the future. The mountain had tried to claim them, but it had failed. Maggie knew the battle was just beginning, but for the first time in years, she felt the icy grip of fear begin to loosen. The fall had tested them, but they were still standing, ready to face the storm to come. Rain tapped rhythmically against the hospital window, the gray clouds hanging low over the city, as if reflecting the weight in Maggie's chest. She lay in the crisp white sheets, her arm bandaged, a dull ache radiating across her ribs and shoulders from the fall on the mountain. Max, the golden retriever who had stayed loyally by her side through the ordeal, rested his head on her lap, eyes attentive, amber fur damp from the storm that seeped through the hospital doors. Maggie's hazel eyes, usually so alert, felt heavy with exhaustion and the aftershocks of fear. Her dark brown hair, now pulled into a loose bun, clung to her damp forehead. She tried to gather her thoughts, the events of the last few days spinning in her mind like a stormy tide. Detective Cole, a tall man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair, angular features, and piercing gray eyes, had arrived shortly after she regained consciousness. Known for his meticulous attention to detail and calm demeanor in crises, he had a reputation for uncovering truths hidden beneath layers of deceit. "Mrs. Taylor?" Detective Cole began softly, his voice steady, the authority in it easing some of her panic. "You've been through a lot. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Maggie swallowed, her throat dry, and nodded. Memories that had haunted her for 25 years, memories of Andrew, her eldest son, the boy whose bright laughter had once filled their home, surfaced with painful clarity. She spoke haltingly at first, describing the years after Andrew's death, the subtle changes in Ethan, the missing funds, the whispered conversations between Ethan and Lily. As she recounted the events, Thomas's figure appeared in the doorway. His broad shoulders were stooped even more than usual, and a deep bruise and cut on his forehead made his face appear gaunt. His green eyes shadowed with guilt. For a moment, Maggie froze, her heart hammering as she tried to reconcile the man she had loved for decades with the image before her. Broken, vulnerable, yet hiding a lifetime of secrets. "Thomas," she whispered, voice trembling. "What happened back then, 25 years ago?" Thomas's voice was hoarse, thick with emotion, as he settled in the chair beside her bed. "Maggie, I couldn't." He paused, swallowing hard. "I saw Ethan. He was the one." His hand trembled as it rested on hers. "Andrew. He found out about the money, the savings, and Ethan, he killed him. I tried to stop it. I begged him to stop. But Andrew, he fell. I thought it was an accident at first. I didn't want to believe." Maggie felt her stomach turn, a cold dread spreading through her veins. She could barely breathe as Thomas continued, his green eyes glassy with regret. "I called the police, and I said it was an accident. I helped Ethan cover it up. I didn't want to lose my sons, Maggie. I thought I could control it, that I could fix everything. But I was wrong. I made him into a monster." The words hit Maggie like a physical blow. Her hands shook uncontrollably, Max whining softly as if sensing her despair. The revelation twisted in her chest. Her husband? her confidant for decades, had not only concealed the truth about Andrew's death, but had actively participated in hiding it. The child she had trusted, nurtured, and protected, Ethan, was the embodiment of that hidden darkness. Detective Cole, noting the tension and Maggie's distress, leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Taylor, take your time. We need the full story, but I understand if it's difficult." His calm voice anchored her in the storm of betrayal and grief. Maggie inhaled shakily, her mind racing. "So, it wasn't an accident," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Ethan, he planned it?" Thomas nodded, his jaw tight, a tear slipping down his cheek. "It started with the money. He saw Andrew as an obstacle because Andrew discovered the withdrawals, the stolen funds. I tried to shield you from it, from him. I thought maybe if we could keep it quiet, he'd learn, he'd change, but I was wrong. 25 years wrong." Maggie's vision blurred with tears. Every cherished memory, every moment of trust, seemed now to be coated in deceit. The room's sterile white walls pressed against her, suffocating in their stillness. Max nudged her hand, grounding her for a moment, reminding her that she still had a tether to reality and to life. Detective Cole's gray eyes softened, but they were sharp with focus. "We will handle this, Mrs. Taylor, but I need you to be strong, to tell everything you know, as painful as it may be." Maggie nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She began detailing Ethan's behaviors over the years, the manipulations, the stolen funds, the lies Lily had enabled. Lily, with her delicate frame, blonde hair, and porcelain skin, whose smiles had always seemed sweet but carried hidden calculations. Maggie described the trips, the family bonding excuses, and the meticulous planning that had culminated in the mountain incident, where she and Thomas had narrowly survived. Hours passed in painstaking recounting. Thomas added details only he knew. The moments he had tried to intervene, the subtle warnings he had ignored, the rationalizations he had told himself to keep the family together. Every confession dug deeper into Maggie's heart, a mixture of grief, rage, and disbelief. By late afternoon, Maggie leaned back against her pillows, exhausted physically and emotionally. Max rested against her knees, his warm presence comforting. Thomas, now pale and quiet, sat in the chair with his hands clasped tightly. Detective Cole took meticulous notes, pausing occasionally to reassure her or ask for clarification. Finally, Maggie whispered, her voice raw. "All these years, all the lies. I thought I was protecting them, protecting my family. But in the end, it only made the darkness grow stronger." Thomas reached over, gently taking her hand. "I know, Maggie, and I can't ask for forgiveness, but we can still protect the rest of the family. We have to stop Ethan now before anyone else gets hurt." His green eyes, for the first time, held a steely determination that replaced some of the guilt. Detective Cole closed his notebook, standing with deliberate authority. "Mrs. Taylor, Thomas, you've given me everything I need. We have the evidence now, and with your cooperation, we'll ensure Ethan and Lily are held accountable for their actions. Your courage in surviving, and in speaking the truth, is what will make justice possible." Maggie exhaled, a mix of relief and lingering terror, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil in her heart. She looked at Thomas, whose face was lined with remorse, and felt a strange, fragile bond of solidarity. Together, they had survived a lifetime of deceit and a recent attempt on their lives. Together, they could face the legal battle and the protection of their grandchildren. Max lifted his head, sensing Maggie's rising determination, and let out a low, protective bark. Maggie smiled faintly through tears, whispering, "Yes, Max, We'll fight for them, for Andrew, for the truth. The rain eased outside, lightening to a gentle drizzle, and Maggie felt a tentative hope. The confession had shaken her world, but it had also laid the groundwork for justice. She knew the path ahead would be fraught with pain and difficult decisions, but she also knew that the truth was now in their hands, and the past could no longer control them. That night, as Thomas finally drifted into a shallow sleep in the hospital chair, Maggie held Max close, staring out the window at the dimly lit city below. The storm had passed, and though the emotional tempest raged within her, she felt a small flicker of power return. The knowledge that secrets had been exposed, and justice, though still distant, was now possible. A cold fog hung over the city streets, seeping into the alleyways and filling the night with an unsettling stillness. The rain had stopped, leaving the air damp and sharp with the scent of wet asphalt. Maggie watched from the hospital window, Max sitting loyally at her feet, his amber eyes alert and attentive. The golden retriever's fur glistened faintly in the dim light, each ripple of muscle beneath the coat emphasizing his age and experience. He was 7 years old, calm yet vigilant, a perfect companion for the tense night ahead. Detective Cole, dressed in a sleek navy trench coat, gray scarf tucked neatly around his neck, stood in the doorway of Maggie's hospital room. His eyes, sharp and calculating under furrowed brows, reflected the plan they had set in motion. He exuded quiet authority, the kind that drew respect even in chaos. "Mrs. Taylor, tonight is the night. Ethan and Lily won't know what hit them." Maggie, her brown hair still damp from her hospital shower, nodded silently. Her hazel eyes were wide, with a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a growing sense of determination. Her arm throbbed faintly under the sling, and her ribs ached with each shallow breath. But the pain was secondary to the urgency of the moment. She knew that after 25 years, justice would finally arrive. Across town, in a dimly lit apartment, Lily paced nervously. The young woman, slender and deceptively delicate, had platinum blonde hair cut in a sharp bob that framed her porcelain face. Her blue eyes darted anxiously between her phone and the window, fingers twisting the silk scarf around her neck as if it could soothe her nerves. Lily's voice was hushed but frantic as she dialed Ethan's number. "Ethan, we need to—" Her words stumbled as she glanced at the tiny recorder Detective Cole had hidden nearby. Every word she spoke was being captured, and she had no idea. Ethan, on the other end of the line, sat slumped in a worn leather chair. The 30-year-old man, tall and broad-shouldered, with chiseled features and dark brown eyes that once reflected mischief but now burned with desperation, ran a hand through his thick hair. A faint scar above his left eyebrow hinted at a reckless youth, a reminder of a fight gone wrong that had hardened his personality over the years. His jaw was clenched as he whispered back to Lily, "We have to destroy the notebook. If they find it, it's all over. Andrew, everything, gone." Detective Cole, stationed just outside the door with Officer Ramirez, a stocky, no-nonsense man in his early 40s, signaled to the team. Every movement was silent but deliberate. They waited, listening to the incriminating conversation that confirmed the plan and revealed the desperation in Ethan's tone. Lily, oblivious to the surveillance, was the first to make a fatal mistake. Her words, coated with panic, revealed not only the notebook's importance, but also her complicity. "We need to act fast before they know we're alive. If Maggie found out, everything is ruined." The trap was set. Detective Cole whispered instructions to Officer Ramirez, and within moments, the apartment was surrounded. Lights flashed, sirens hummed in the distance, but inside, Ethan was unaware of the encroaching police presence. He stood suddenly, pushing the chair back with a loud scrape against the wooden floor. "We can't wait any longer. Grab the notebook. We'll burn it tonight," he muttered, pacing the room like a predator cornered. Lily nodded, her movements sharp and anxious. She was petite, almost fragile in appearance, but there was a steeliness to her posture, a careful, practiced composure that masked the panic beneath. Her porcelain skin seemed almost luminescent under the dim lamplight, but her blue eyes flickered with fear and calculation. Detective Cole gave the silent signal. The door burst open, and uniformed officers stormed in. Ethan's eyes widened, the raw shock evident in his dark pupils. He backed toward the window, every muscle taut, as if ready to flee. The adrenaline surged, and for a moment, he looked like the young boy who had once smiled so innocently, hiding the darkness that had been festering within him for decades. "Ethan Taylor, you are under arrest for the murder of Andrew Taylor and the attempted murder of Maggie and Thomas Taylor," Detective Cole announced firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. Ethan froze, then bolted for the back door. A slip of wet tile sent him sprawling, and in the scramble, he dropped the notebook, the very evidence that had sealed his fate. Officer Ramirez moved swiftly, pinning him to the floor as Ethan screamed in frustration, his voice a mix of fury and panic. Lily's scream echoed in the apartment. "No! Ethan, don't!" But her words were futile. The officers moved to restrain her as well, her arms flailing as she tried to resist. Detective Cole approached, his presence calm but commanding. "Miss Lily, you are under arrest as an accomplice in these crimes. Your attempts to manipulate and destroy evidence will not go unpunished." Lily's blue eyes narrowed, and she spat words of blame at Ethan, trying to shift the guilt. "It was his idea! He forced me into this!" Her voice was sharp, laced with hysteria, the veneer of sweetness she usually wore stripped away by fear. Ethan, pinned and restrained, looked at her, his dark eyes blazing with anger and despair. "You were with me every step of the way. Don't pretend you're innocent now." His voice cracked with the weight of years of lies and deception, the sound reverberating with bitter truth. Detective Cole stepped between them, his gray eyes scanning both faces with unwavering focus. "Your attempts to deceive the law end tonight. Every word has been recorded, every action observed. Justice will proceed." Ethan, realizing there was no escape, slumped against the floor, his broad shoulders sagging. The dark brown of his hair clung damply to his forehead, streaked with sweat, his chiseled face twisted in despair. I didn't mean for any of it. Andrew, it was an accident, I swear." But the officers and the detectives had all the evidence needed, recorded confessions, the stolen money trail, and the failed attempt on Maggie and Thomas's lives. There was no room for denial. Lily, sobbing and frantic, kept repeating, "It wasn't my fault. I didn't want to hurt anyone." But even her practiced manipulation couldn't erase the recordings of her scheming. Her delicate hands, once used to hiding evidence and whispering conspiracies, now shook uncontrollably as she was escorted out. Back in the hospital, Maggie watched from the window, her heart pounding with a cocktail of relief and lingering terror. Max nudged her hand, sensing her need for comfort. She finally allowed herself a trembling smile, the kind that came from knowing the nightmare had begun to end. Detective Cole returned shortly after, nodding toward the hospital. "They're in custody. Every detail has been documented, and both will face charges. Your bravery and cooperation made this possible." Maggie exhaled deeply, the tension in her body slowly unwinding. The weight of 25 years of secrets, lies, and near-death experiences had begun to lift, replaced by a cautious hope. Thomas, who had just awakened from another brief sleep, turned to her weakly, green eyes filled with remorse. They're caught," he whispered hoarsely. Maggie nodded, gripping his hand. The realization hit both of them fully. They were safe for the first time in decades, and justice had started to take its course. Outside, the city's fog began to lift, revealing the dim glow of streetlights reflecting on wet asphalt. It was a small but significant sign, a world slowly coming back into order after the storm of betrayal and violence. Maggie leaned back against her pillows, Max resting his head on her lap once more. The golden retriever's presence reminded her of the stability and loyalty still left in the world, and the promise that life, even after unimaginable betrayal, could continue. The arrest had not erased the pain, the loss, or the fear, but it had carved a path toward justice and protection for the family she still held dear. For the first time in 25 years, Maggie allowed herself to hope that the darkness surrounding her family might finally recede. The late spring sun filtered through the half-open blinds, casting golden stripes across the living room carpet. Outside, the wind whispered through the blossoming magnolia trees, carrying a scent of renewal. Maggie sat on the sofa, her hazel eyes tired but soft, as she watched her grandchildren play on the floor. Max, their loyal golden retriever, padded around them gently, occasionally nudging a toy toward them. At 8 years old, his coat was slightly grayer around the muzzle, yet he moved with the same calm and gentle authority he had always had. Thomas, now walking with a cane after his injuries had healed slowly, reclined in his favorite armchair. His green eyes, once clouded by fear and guilt, were now steady and observant. The lines etched on his face spoke of decades of stress, but today they softened with contentment. His brown hair had thinned slightly, and his once angular jaw seemed more relaxed, softened by relief. He watched Maggie, seeing her finally at peace, and felt a deep sense of gratitude that they had survived the horrors inflicted by Ethan and Lily. It had been 6 months since the trial, the courtroom drama, the confessions, the arrests. All were now memories, though still vivid. Ethan had received life imprisonment without parole, the judge deeming his crimes too severe for leniency. Lily, who had tried to manipulate and frame Ethan to save herself, was sentenced to 40 years in prison, her pale blue eyes haunted by the consequences of her choices. Maggie remembered the day the verdicts were read. Ethan had looked at her once, the darkness in his brown eyes replaced by a stunned realization of his own failure. Lily had cried, screamed, and finally fallen silent, her composure shattered completely. Now, the house was quiet, filled only with the gentle sounds of laughter and the soft patting of Max's paws. Maggie's attention shifted to her grandchildren, Emma, 6, and Lucas, 4. Emma, with her mother's platinum blonde hair but her father's dark brown eyes, had a fiery curiosity, constantly asking questions about the world. Lucas, with soft brown curls and Maggie's hazel eyes, was quieter, more observant, often clinging to Max for comfort. They were innocent, untouched by the malice that had consumed their parents, yet the shadow of that past lingered in Maggie's mind. She felt a heavy responsibility, a solemn duty to protect them from the darkness they had unknowingly inherited. Maggie rose slowly, her arm still stiff from old injuries, and joined the children on the floor. Emma hugged her tightly. "Grandma, tell us again about Uncle Andrew," she pleaded, her voice bright and innocent. Maggie swallowed a lump in her throat, feeling the old pain resurface. Andrew, her firstborn, the boy who had been so full of life, had died defending the truth. She traced a finger along his old photo frame on the mantel, remembering his brown hair, playful green eyes, and warm smile that could light up any room. "He was brave," Maggie said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "He loved our family, and he always wanted to protect what was right. That's why we have to be honest and kind, just like him." Emma nodded solemnly, her small hands gripping Maggie's fingers tightly. Lucas, sensing the gravity in the story, simply rested his head against her knee, trusting in her presence to make sense of the complex emotions swirling in the room. Thomas moved closer, leaning on his cane, but keeping his posture strong. "Andrew may not be here," he added, voice gentle but firm. "But the lessons he left us guide everything we do. We protect each other, we tell the truth, and we never let fear decide our actions." The children listened intently, absorbing the values their grandparents lived by, values forged in the crucible of betrayal and survival. In the evenings, Maggie began keeping a journal again, something she had abandoned in the chaos of the past months. The leather-bound book was soft to the touch, worn at the edges, yet comforting. She wrote meticulously, recounting every detail of their experiences, not as a record of pain, but as a testament to resilience and love. "We cannot choose our blood," she wrote one night, her pen gliding across the page. "But we can choose what remains after the truth. Love, even when it is hurt, remains the only thing worth keeping." The children, sensing the rhythm of their grandmother's writing, often sat nearby, occasionally asking about the events they could barely understand. Maggie answered them carefully, shielding them from the darker realities while instilling lessons of courage and morality. Max lay between them, occasionally lifting his head to watch over the family, his golden eyes alert, the bond between the animal and humans palpable and protective. The days settled into a peaceful routine, a stark contrast to the chaos that had dominated their lives. Maggie and Thomas worked tirelessly to create a home where laughter replaced fear. They decorated the house with bright colors, plants in every room, and framed photos of Andrew, a constant reminder of the sacrifice that had shaped their lives. Thomas took up light woodworking in the garage, a hobby he had once shared with Andrew, finding solace in the rhythmic motions of carving and sanding. His calloused hands were a testament to both his craft and his resilience. Every night, before tucking the children into bed, Maggie recounted stories of bravery, kindness, and justice. The tales were imbued with a moral compass she wanted to instill in them, a shield against the toxicity of their parents' past. She described Andrew not just as a tragic figure, but as a hero, someone who had chosen honesty over deceit and courage over cowardice. The children, in their innocence, absorbed these lessons, their laughter and questions slowly healing the invisible scars left by Ethan and Lily. Weeks later, the media continued to cover the aftermath of the trial, but Maggie and Thomas remained private, choosing to focus on their grandchildren rather than public attention. The sense of relief that came with knowing justice had been served was tempered by the weight of the past, yet it allowed them to build something new from the ashes of betrayal. Their home became a sanctuary, a place where the children could grow without fear, where love was genuine and unconditional. One rainy afternoon, Maggie sat by the window, journal in hand, watching droplets race down the glass. The sky was gray but peaceful, the storm outside nothing like the storms they had endured inside. She wrote, "Every day is a choice. We cannot undo the past, but we can nurture the future. Emma and Lucas deserve a world shaped by truth, not lies, and we will give it to them, piece by piece." Thomas joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. His voice, calm and warm, broke the silence. "We survived, Maggie. We protected the family, and we will continue to do so. Andrew's spirit guides us still. Maggie smiled, leaning into his touch. There was a quiet strength in knowing that despite everything, they had preserved what mattered most: life, love, and truth. Evenings were no longer haunted by fear or whispered conspiracies. Instead, the household buzzed with simple joys: storytelling, laughter, bedtime rituals, and the soft presence of Max, always nearby. Maggie reflected on the journey, the betrayals of Ethan and Lily, and the unthinkable weight of secrecy kept for decades. Yet in this moment, surrounded by the next generation, she realized that the darkness had finally been replaced by light. In the final pages of her journal, Maggie wrote, "We cannot choose our blood, but we can choose what remains. Love, truth, and courage will always endure, and that is how we honor those we have lost." She closed the book gently, the spine creaking faintly, a sound that resonated like a promise. Outside, the magnolia trees swayed in the night breeze, their blossoms fragrant and unbroken, a reflection of the life that continued, resilient and beautiful despite everything.